Well, hello everyone. So I wanted to do another Cowside Chats, and I had the opportunity to go home to Arizona and video where I was raised, and I wanted to take you through that part of my life, from the quaint little town where we turn off to go to the town called Aravaka and look at some of the scenery along the way. And then I described the ranch and kind of the topography and all the things that made my growing up years something that stuck with me very closely my whole life. And we shot some drone footage, and then towards the end of the video, stay tuned for a trek from the Mexican border through two ranches that I'm very familiar with. One is the Trespiotas ranch, owned by my wife's family, and then the Hereas ranch that was owned by my uncle at one time. And then the predominant part of the video is all centered around the ranch that my dad and mom owned while I was growing up. So very different ranching in southern Arizona compared to here in Texas, but it shows you some contrasts, and I talk about a lot of the things in that landscape that contrast the difference between how I ranch here. So I hope you enjoy. Stay tuned, and we'll go through that sequence of events in my life back 45 years ago. Thank you for watching. I'm in southern Arizona, and I want to take you on a little trip back in time, back to my ranching roots. And we're going to start the journey at a junction of a little town called Amado, A-M-A-D-O. You can look at it on your phone and map it. I'm about 35 miles south of Tucson and 27 miles north of Nogales, Arizona, where I was born. And then shortly after I was born, we moved to the ranch in Aravaka, and we'll go through the tale of ranching in southern Arizona. But I wanted to show you this iconic place. This is called the Cow Palace. It was a happening place when I was a kid. Dance hall, bar, served great steaks. It was the place to be, and the only place to be anywhere between Tucson and Nogales, which were the major metropolitan areas. And the other thing I wanted to show you is sometime in my junior high or high school years, somebody built this Longhorn that's the entrance into a restaurant. This is called the Longhorn Grill, and it is now the happening place. The Cow Palace itself is closed and has been for many years, but the Longhorn Grill is open, and I'm going to show you a during the day picture before they open for to serve their patrons, and to follow shortly will be a nighttime view of the bustling parking lot. But we're going to go 25 miles west of here to the little town of Aravaka, which was a ranching community, and we'll show you some of the sights along the way. Stay tuned. Although the Longhorn Grill seems pretty deserted during the day, this is what it looks like at night, and a lot of the locals come here to eat, as well as some of the tourists. So we're driving down the road. We're about halfway to the town of Aravaka, and you see this sign periodically along the route, open range, meaning the road is not fenced off. And so as you travel, you have to be on the lookout for cattle. These are expansive ranch lands, and you can see a lot of mesquite trees. You can actually see a lot of grass here. They had really good rains this last late summer. You can see the mountain ranges on the way, and we're headed right over there, and so we will keep going on the trek. I wanted to show you, this is tough country. This is a cholla cactus, and those things, it's also called jumping cactus, and it will actually, if you go by it on horseback and your horse brushes against it, it'll hit you, it'll attach to the horse. There's also some prickly pear cactus. And the other thing I want to show you is a plant called ocotillo. And this particular, it's a cactus of sorts. Again, you can see all the mesquite trees here. Everything in Arizona has a thorn or will bite you. It's quite an interesting landscape, and as you can see, there would be no way to rotationally graze this as far as using electric fence. It's too expansive, it's too rugged, and there's brush everywhere. So this is a small ocotillo, and you can see all the thorns on that. And when you're riding through that on horseback, these thickets of ocotillo will be exceedingly dense. This one's not very dense. Would be easy to ride through this on horseback. But there is rough terrain, and this is not very rough. This is pretty mild terrain, easy to work on horseback and gather cattle here. You can see that beautiful mountain range there. That's called the Sierra Colorado Mountains. And then right here is a barrel cactus. And those are especially deadly on horses, because if they get one of these curved thorns in their pastern area, the lower leg, it embeds in there, and you won't know it till the horse gets extremely crippled. And those can be tough. So there's another beautiful mountain range there. That's called Baldy Peak, the one at the very top. That's about 9,000 foot of elevation. So I'm looking east, and my dad was a forest ranger, worked for the Forest Service when he was in late high school, early college, and he stayed up there in a cabin all summer and looked for forest fires. So they would spot as far as they could see and look for any signs of smoke, so they could alert the Forest Service and they could go fight the grass fires. Grass fires are quite common here during the monsoon season from July through mid-September, and they will be started by lightning, and once they get going, it is an incredible sight to see. We fought many a fire by horseback and would ride to where the fire was and use a thing called a swatter that actually smothers the fire. It looks like a shovel handle attached to a mud flap on a truck, and we would fight those fires. The Forest Service would come in, send crews in as well, and then oftentimes the big planes would come in and drop the red slurry to smother the fire. And that was a sight to see, those planes lumbering up. Several times I was in the drop zone, and my dad would yell, "Get down, get down, get down," as those planes came over, because when that slurry would hit you, if you were standing up, it'd flat knock you down and could kill you. So lots of history here. I'm going to continue the journey. Stay tuned. So I want to give you a little perspective. We're looking down into a little valley where the town of Aravaka is, and I'll show you Main Street here in just a minute. So it's nestled between all these mountain ranges, and it's a very quaint, picturesque town. Its history dates clear back to Father Kino back in the 1600s. He made a trek through here, and this was a town of probably, I would guess, 75 to 100 people when I was growing up back in the early 60s, and not much here. I'll show you the Aravaka Mercantile, which is a little store that people shop at, get some groceries, but typically we trekked 60 miles to Tucson once a month to get food and supplies. So our ranch extended from just to the side of this mountain here. I'm sorry, my camera's trying to focus on my finger, but just over here, right in there, is where our ranch starts. To the east encompasses that entire mountain range, and it's very rough, I'll tell you, and extended clear to that peak right there. And I'm trying to find my finger, there it is. So that just to the left of that peak is where the ranch extended, and I want to show you that, or tell you that a third of the ranch is on this side of that mountain range, and extended almost to the town here. Our house is right on top of that hill, right in the center of the screen. That was where I was raised for the first 18 years of my life, and then came home while I was going to college at the University of Arizona, usually every weekend. So I was raised right there. And so this is about a 5-section pasture on this side of that mountain range. And a section is 640 acres, so it's over 3,000 acres. And then 2/3 of the ranch is on the other side of that mountain range. And let me tell you, that mountain range is rough. I've been all over the top of that mountain range gathering cattle. And the carrying capacity of this country is about 1 cow-calf pair, or 1 animal unit, for 40 acres. In a good year, it would take 36 acres to run them. And the monsoon season is in July and August, and our typical rainfall would be 17 to 18 inches a year. So all the grass has to be grown during that period of time. And this grass is gamma grass, side oats. There's a few different varieties. And this grass cures standing, which you can see this yellow grass here. It's got tremendous protein in it, and we don't feed any hay in this country, or we didn't when I was a kid. Some of the ranchers do a little bit during the winter. And the cows would stay fat on this grass. It just looks dead and totally unnutritious, but amazingly they would stay fat and raise a calf and do well. So we raised about 400 head of Hereford cows on that ranch there. My dad sold, and let me back up. So that ranch consisted of 1,200 acres of deeded land, or private land, that my dad owned, and then he leased the rest from the Forest Service. It was a Forest Service permit ranch. There was some state leased land on it. But when you buy these ranches, you buy it just like you're buying it outright as all deeded land, which is still amazing to me. And he sold the Forest Service lease and a little bit of the deeded land to an individual who still has well, it's gone through 2 owners, but the latest owner that's had it for quite a while still owns it. And then he sold the remaining, I think he kept 800 acres. He sold the remaining 800 acres to the Buenos Aires Wildlife Refuge, and they are keeping it in perpetuity, whatever that word is, and using it for, it's kind of a nature preserve of sorts, preserving the land for future generations. So that's my story. That's where I was raised. I have been horseback on that property since I was old enough to be on a horse, which is about, well, I can remember being on a horse and my dad leading me at 2 and 3 years old. And then when I was able to handle the horse myself, then it went on from there. So been on horseback all my life. It would take a couple days to gather that 3,000 acre pasture because it's so rough. And again, if you do the math on how many cows that would run for a year, 3,000 plus acres divided by 40 acres, and that's how many cows would be on there. Take us a couple days to gather those cows, bring them to the house where we had corrals at our house, which you can see right in the center of the screen. And so different than in Texas, where you've seen me talk to you about pinning those cows. I can pin 60 head in about 22 seconds because they'll run into the pen to get the breeder's cubes if I use my feeder. So a whole different way of life. This is still a little bit of the Wild West of sorts. All the cattle are still gathered on horseback. There's no way to do it on UTVs and all those other things that we do in Texas. Rotational grazing, other than fencing your pastures with barbed wire fence, just can't be done here. There's too much brush, too many ravines. I'll show you some of the rougher country here in a little bit, but amazing way to grow up. I'm very passionate about my heritage, and we'll continue the journey here in just a minute. Stay tuned. So the last part of my dad's ranch was bought by the Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge, and there's a creek that used to run all the way through our ranch that was called the Aravaka scenic, and that just means basically a wet meadow. It was a sub-irrigated meadow, and just an awesome growing up experience. We used to go play in the creek. It ran year round. It ran quite a bit of water, but all the development of houses in a ranch just behind me was subdivided into 40-acre parcels, and there's quite a few people that live upstream of me where I'm standing now behind me, and then some of those 40-acre parcels then were subsequently broken up into 10 and 20-acre parcels. So the creek no longer runs. It just does so in the rainy season, again, which is July and August, but it's dry the rest of the year, so that's unfortunate, but it just shows you the impact of humans on our environment. And that's why regenerative ranching is so important. We want to improve the soil, improve the water holding capacity of the soil, and new springs and water systems will develop as we recycle the water and do the appropriate things regeneratively to try to maintain these systems. So that's part of the past. I can't change that, and we'll go on from here. So I'll show you the town next. So this is Main Street, Aravaka, Arizona. This is the only store in town, Aravaka Mercantile. been named that since I was a kid back in the early 60s. We used to wait for the bus here. This is where the bus would pick us up and bus us 45 miles to school. In the early years, I went to grade school about 16 miles away, but that school has subsequently been demolished. And so then in junior high and high school, we went 45 miles. At the end of the street, I'll show you a close-up here in a minute, was another little store when I was a kid. And when I was probably 5 years old, I stole a pack of gum while I was in that store with my dad. And on the way home, I was chewing gum, and he noticed that and asked me where I got the gum, because he knew he didn't buy it for me. And of course, I was caught red-handed. And he turned around and we went back to the store, and I had to tell the store owner that I stole the gun and pay for it, which my dad gave me the money, obviously. And that certainly made an impression on me, and I have tried to instill those same values in my kids and told that story many times. So all there is on Main Street, there's a couple of shops. There's a little trinket shop right behind those hunters. There's a bar and a grill right here. And that's been there ever since, again, since I was a kid. Lots of memories here. I'll show you some buildings down the street. So here's the post office. And this was not here when I was a kid. We got our mail at the Aravaka Mercantile. That was where it was delivered to. And I still remember our box number, P.O. Box 214, Aravaka, Arizona. So that's new. It's been here a lot of years now, but that's new to me. And then looking down the street again at the little store where I stole the gum, that had big old mounted heads of animals that had been killed in the area. Just look at the architecture here. That's been redone with stucco. Look at the roof. Still the same roof from years and years ago, and in this dry climate, it'll last forever. And I vividly remember the people that owned the store. Where he got his name, I'm unsure, but his first name was Hack, H-A-C-K, Hack Townsend, and his wife, Emma. They lived in this house here. And so Hack and Emma May is what her name was, Hack and Emma May Townsend. That little building right there was a restaurant at one time, very small, but I've eaten there a few times back in the day. That's now just an outbuilding or part of this residence. And so that's Aravaka. There's a town leading that way. You can see Babakibri Peak in the background, or not a town, there's a road leading that way that goes to another town right on the Mexican border named Sasabe. But look how picturesque that is. Beautiful mountain. And I'll show you more. Stay tuned. One more little quick note. This is the little store again where I stole the pack of gum. And when I was a kid, this gas pump was functioning and we would fill up our vehicles here. Thankfully, it's been restored and kept on site, but a little bit of history for you. Okay, so just a little different perspective. I'm kind of standing in the middle of the ranch, looking from north to south. And if I zoom in right here, there it is, you can see a little outbuilding right in the middle of the picture. That was where we originally lived when my dad built a little cabana there, and there was a mobile home, an old 8-foot wide by 32-foot long mobile home, and we lived there for about a year while him and my granddad built that house behind there with some outside help, obviously. But again, there's the headquarters, the working pens, and the barns are down the hill from there to the right. And then as I zoom back, I want you to see the expanse of this ranch. So it went from the far right of the video, where the top of that little mountain is, it went from just to the left of there, so right about there on the right side of your screen. And I remember there's a trail that goes up through that pass to get to the back side of the ranch, and it is a rough son of a gun. And then that mountain range all the way clear to that peak, but just to the right of that peak. So I'm going to put the video camera just where the ranch started, right there. That mountain just to the right of the left of your screen was the east side of the ranch. So again, 1/3 of the ranch is on this side of that mountain range, 2/3 on the other side. And if I zoom in, you can see it's rough. Getting up in there and getting cattle out of there, all done on horseback, no other way to do it. Cattle were quite people shy, and so it was often a big event. It took lots of cowboys to get ahead of them. Those cattle, some of them were quite wild, which is why I espouse gentle cattle. Now, you want your cattle gentle so you can deal with them. But more, I mean, it was the Wild West for sure, and I hope I can give you a sense of that on video. We sent a drone up, and we're at the east side of the ranch, which is just to the right of that tall peak on the left. Panning around again, from this altitude, the ranch doesn't seem too rough, but it's pretty tame here in the foreground, but it's pretty wicked in the background. There's Bobakibri Peak. We're at about 3,600 feet of elevation in the town of Aravaka, so these mountains are obviously higher, probably another 500 or 600 feet. And we're going to pan around to a 360 here. Bobakibri Peak is our landmark. We're looking at the west side of the ranch there, which is the peak in the foreground just to the left of Bobakibri Peak. Panning around, you can see the arroyo down at the bottom of the foothills there, where the water flows out of the mountains when we do have rain, and we will definitely get flash floods in those washes. And then we're coming to the east side of the ranch. That peak that just came into view to the right of that is the east side of the ranch. And then panning around to a neighboring ranch here, and a mountain range that's probably 15 miles, 8 to 15 miles, somewhere in that range away. And then the town of Aravaka will come into view here in just a minute. There it is on the left, and now in the center of your screen. And then we pan through this valley, mountain ranges on either side, to Bobakibri Peak again. And so that's the bird's eye view. I want to take you 14 miles south to the Mexican border, to my in-laws' ranch called Trespiotas Ranch. It's a 29 section ranch. You can see Trump's border wall in the background there, if you look closely. And this is at the headquarters. They live 1/4 of a mile away from the Mexican border. Up until a few years ago, it was just a barbed wire fence, and we could go across freely into Mexico and help the neighboring ranchers gather cattle. But again, the Trump wall coming into view, and their house is right behind me. but this is the Trespiotas Ranch, 14 miles from Aravaka. As we start driving back towards Aravaka, I want to describe the ranch land. You can see this Charolais cow and Charolais bull. And look at the forage. It looks very, very dry, but those cattle were in extremely good shape, and they're not getting any outside hay or any grain. So again, continuing our journey back, you can see this is a really rough ranch as well. All this country between the Trespiotas Ranch and Aravaka is very rough terrain, very rugged. You can see the road leading towards Aravaka. It typically takes about an hour or thereabouts, plus or minus, depending on your speed of travel, to drive to Aravaka from the ranch. And so think about 14 miles over rough roads and it taking an hour, and it's pretty substantial rough roads. A lot of the road is down the sand washes, and when that is the primary road, then what you know is that every time it rains enough to run water, the road bed's going to change, and it can get pretty rocky and pretty rough. So hard on vehicles, so you have to go somewhat slow. So we're looking at Frauwita Peak that just is to the right of the screen. And you can see again, these hills don't look as steep on video as they are. I mean, this is a real workout for a horse to get up on these ridges. And when we're rounding up the cattle, you're going to have cowboys on each of these ridges, and we're looking down in the canyons, we're riding down in the canyons to push cattle down towards the creek, and then there's going to be cowboys down on the bottom pushing the cattle that come off the ridges on down towards the corral. So again, we're just driving down the road. We're headed north towards Aravaka, and that is Frauwita Peak from the south side, the tall peak right in the center of the screen, and the big wash down at the bottom there that's lined with oak trees. Those are mostly live oak trees at this elevation. Quite a bit of mesquite as well in this country. As we get closer to Aravaka, we get a lot more mesquite because of the elevation change and very few scattered live oak trees. This is very, very brushy country down in these draws, and you have to wear leather chaps to protect your legs from the brush and the thorns and the cactus and all the things that you have to ride through as you're gathering cattle. But this is a pretty steep ridge we're coming off of here, and again, the video doesn't do it justice, but this is very typical of the country south of Aravaka. And again, between the Mexican border and Aravaka, there's just 3 ranches: the Trespiotas Ranch, the Hereas Ranch, which I'll show you here in just a minute, and then the ranch that my folks owned, which when we owned it was called the Pocahontas Ranch, Pocahonnas, and that was my dad's humor. And then we progressed to the Hereas Ranch. My dad's brother owned this ranch for a time. It's been through 3 or 4 owners since I was a kid, but it is called the Hereas Ranch, and very nice ranch nestled in the hills here. You can see the corrals, which is right below the main house that you can see back in those bigger trees. And again, some cattle in the corral. Don't know why, but they're feeding a few head there for reasons that only they know. And look at the trees are fixing to lose their leaves. The live oaks won't. Those live oaks will retain their leaves throughout the winter, but all the trees with yellow leaves are fixing to drop their leaves here fairly quickly. This sand wash is called Frauwida wash, and when it rains, this wash will actually run water for oftentimes weeks during the rainy season, and it'll run a good amount of water. I mean, it'll be a legitimate bona fide running creek that'll be 2 or 3 foot wide and will run all the way down to Aravaka, which is probably about 8 miles away from this point, and empty into Aravaka Creek where the Aravaka Cienega is. And here's just typical grassland. The grass looks exceptionally good here because the Forest Service has cut the allotted number of cattle that the ranchers can keep on the property. That just happened this year because they were in a major drought and they're trying to let the grass regrow. So they're doing their best efforts at land management. We've progressed on the trip now to where we're looking at the Hannes Ranch, and again, steep country, very rocky. You can see were we to be looking for cattle in this particular pasture, there's lots of places for them to hide. So they'll get down on these brush thickets, and those cattle are smart, and they know how to hide. And so it takes a lot of cowboys to try to get the cattle pushed out of these brush pockets and down into the canyons. This is one of those Ocotillo ridges I was talking about. You can see that there's just a dense amount of Ocotillos, and when you would ride through those Ocotillo ridges, I mean, it was a big chore to try to not get scraped up really bad. And so the equipment you had on, protective equipment, long sleeve shirts, the chaps on your legs, the leather leggings, really important just to try to keep you from getting beat up when you're trying to get the cattle out of these hills. So we're coming down into the tamer country again, and again you can see the expanse of the ranch. And again, not to belabor the point, but our ranch was 21 sections, which is a little over 13,000 acres. About 3,200 acres was on this side of the mountain range, and the rest was on the other side of that mountain range. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to go back on the other side and get any footage. But again, just an unbelievable experience growing up and being a part of the incredible adventures that happened on horseback gathering cattle. I've been hurt numerous times, either getting bucked off or falling off or rubbed off on a tree when going at high rates of speed trying to get around cattle that are trying to get away. And I could regale many stories of wrecks that happened on horseback, but this was my heritage, and one that I wish I could pass on to my kids, but that's not meant to be. So I'll have to suffice it with staying in Texas, and I'm happy that I'm able to do that for sure, and continue the ranching tradition to some extent in Texas. So hope you appreciate this video. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.